Okay, let's start again. So we had a webinar this morning, UK time, where the panel discussed how emerging technologies can advance sustainability. The background is that we are in the midst of a global pandemic that affects every economy across the globe. It's also the reason why we're holding today's virtual ISO General Assembly. So at the moment, we're also witnessing extreme weather events, heat waves, droughts, floods, and many countries have declared a climate emergency. And the buzzwords of resilience, sustainability, and green economic recovery have never been more important. Yet we're also witnessing technology accelerating at an ever-increasing pace. Artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, and new low-carbon technologies are all emerging. It's quite hard to understand the full potential and impact that these technologies may have, but what we do know is that they will have an impact and they could provide a paradigm shift in the years to come. These emerging technologies have a tremendous potential to do good things and support the sustainability and resilience of our planet as we move towards 2050. A date when many countries are aiming to be net zero emission economies. Yet at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that these technologies have the potential to cause harm and carry significant downsides, from resource depletion to worker displacement or wider social and societal impacts. So if we want to reap the benefits of emerging technologies to support the fight against climate change, we need to really understand the role that these technologies can play to support sustainability and understand the whole system change required to reap the benefits that these technologies can make. We also need to understand how we can optimize for the benefits whilst ensuring that we put safeguards in place to minimize the downsides and any risks that these technologies might pose. So earlier on today, we had two expert speakers present this morning on this exact topic. Suzanne Baker, who is the Associate Director for Climate and Environment and Sustainability at Tech UK, discussed the applications of emerging technology for sustainability. And Nur Karandis, who's a design principal at Ada Design and an innovation and business mentor at Cambridge University, focusing on sustainability, talked about the need for a systemic transformation in a climate emergency. This generated quite a few questions, and this session is a follow-up where we put those questions that were generated to the panel. I'll fairly briefly introduce myself as well, if I can be so presumptuous. But I'm Sepp van Doorn. I'm the Associate Director here at the BSI for Energy and Sustainability. And my role looks at the future standardization needs to support society's transition to a net zero economy. Before I open up the sort of questions, I do a tiny bit of housekeeping just to make you aware that this is a listen-only webinar that is being recorded. If you can mute, please do so. And if you have any questions, please post those questions to us. We will bring these morning sessions questions and any questions that you might have. If you can post them via the chat function, that would be great, and we submit them to the panel. So without further ado, I'll start with some questions that we had. I hope the speakers are unmuted. So it was a very interesting session today. I think what was very key for me, Suzanne, is how you sketched out the sort of challenges and actually the sort of opportunities that we have with these emerging technologies. You are talking to a global audience of standards makers, and so for me the question is, how can we ensure that standards are supportive of emerging technologies and not perceived as barriers, which sometimes we have to acknowledge they are in innovation circles? Have you any thoughts on that?
So I think, I can totally recognize that sometimes standards have been seen as a barrier, potentially locking in technology solutions in a particular direction. But I think there is so much kind of fertile ground for standards to actually support international collaboration and innovation. I think I touched on it during my presentation a bit, but by defining common definitions, defining common characteristics and test conditions, by agreeing on ethical principles for application of certain technologies, particularly AI, all of these things can enable and support international collaboration rather than hinder or lead to a specific innovation lock-in.
Yes, no, absolutely. And for me, there also seems to be something for us standards makers to sort of look ahead, to say, where is this going and when is the right time to standardize? And particularly if you look at a few from sort of regulation, standards could come in before to sort of put some of those safeguards in place.
Yeah, I think BSI have a really good approach where, for example, there's been some really interesting work around smart appliances and making them ready for a flexible energy system, so that if there is too much energy on the grid, smart appliances can be triggered to perhaps operate at a certain time, or you can incentivize consumers to run washing machines at night rather than in the day, where there's much more low carbon energy on the system. Or conversely, if there is not enough power available through intermittent renewable energy, you could perhaps slightly reduce the temperature of fridges, for example. Now, of course, this is an evolving area, and manufacturers have lots of different approaches and techniques, and actually just setting standards and then kind of reviewing them periodically as well, and committing to reviewing those standards every 6 months, so they are and remain aligned with what the system needs and how the system is being designed, but also how the manufacturers are responding as well. Seems like a really sensible way to go forward for those particular challenges.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that sort of program sits sort of in my portfolio selfishly, but also it's become quite a bit of a flagship. I was talking about this with Nur earlier, because it's one where we brought a wide variety of stakeholders together to actually look at the problem. And again, it's the experts that tell us what is needed, which was quite good. Nur, same to you, just putting the pressure on. You are talking to a global audience of standards makers. So my question to you is, you talked a lot about systems and systems design thinking. How could we incorporate this sort of approach, or start to incorporate, because I'd imagine it's a journey, but how can we start to incorporate sort of wider systems thinking into the standards making process?
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about standards in terms of, like, giving a guidance to kind of future operation and work, the way I see it, it's kind of like two types of the way we can look at it is two types. So number one is maybe a bit more kind of top down, looking into the industries. For example, what do we expect from next generation of supply chain? How is the next generation of delivery service? Or what is the kind of upcoming new models that we started seeing? Like Uber has changed the way we take taxi, Airbnb has changed the way we travel, etc. So I guess that industry specific looking into it with the systems thinking perspective can give us, when I say us, it's just highly collaborative. So whichever industry we will be looking at, we just need to work with from these industries. And that top-down approach will help us to dive into heart of the problems in that system. And then really what systems can help us here is understand the cause and effect relationship in these systems, and really going into pieces by looking at the whole picture and then diving deeper. And I think where the framework I introduced earlier is because system design can help us then in the small parts. How is this change impact people? So basically that's how we look at. So bringing these two worlds together, looking into it, I think number one is looking into kind of industry wise, like factories, industries, like different specific domains and areas. And the second, which I have also questioned, I don't know the answer, is the innovation itself. Like looking at Suzanne's presentation, this is such an amazing technologies out there, and so many people around the world, try experiment. And we did that as well. And
Sorry, guys. Can I ask those that aren't on mute and aren't asking a question? Can they mute themselves, please? Go on there.
I think it's better now. So I face this challenge when every time when we design something that doesn't exist, and innovation is already basically you kind of come up with something really new or built like a new use case. It is design-led system. The systems are kind of idea with design thinking and system thinking is bring this human centricity into the systems. But we are lacking not just standards, we're lacking policies and rules and any regulations around ethics, for example. And now and we talk about this a lot in design communities. we cannot undo the harm AI can do. You know, I think the digital era was affordable, at least, you know, all these like button of Facebook and stuff. But I think with the smart technologies, the harm can be very, very difficult. So it needs to move together while we are developing these technologies and collaboration. Like I would love, for example, to have someone from standards, from policies and governments in my projects and work with them to figure out.
Yes. Very interesting. So there's another sort of question that I have is, what are some of the building blocks that we have to put in place to increase the probability of success for these emerging technologies? And then also come on some of the tough questions in a minute. To give you an example, and I don't know if I'm going to steal sort of somebody's thunder here, but when we look at energy, the thing that I realise is there's a big problem around data and common data in all of these stakeholders. It seems if we crack that sort of problem, that these emerging technologies sort of almost start from a clean data in output, and that they can be much more effective. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on what some of those sort of cornerstones, building blocks can be to increase both the success of these emerging technologies, but also the adoption, I suppose.
Yeah, so you know, there is a kind of assumption with digital technologies that they will disrupt. And they will come along and completely disrupt sectors. Whereas I think around the net zero transition, what we're seeing is actually there's got to be some very careful groundwork, collaboration, and planning involved. So, for example, go back to energy, because there's so much happening in the UK around energy at the moment. There's a task force called the Energy Digitalisation Task Force that has been established by BEIS, Innovate UK, and is being run out of our Energy Systems Catapult and chaired by the very lovely Laura Sands, a former MP here. And she also led a previous task force called the Energy Data Task Force. And what we're seeing now is various different models being trialed and assessed around exactly what data is needed, by whom, how, and where. There is a risk that, you know, digital technologies open up the ability to gather more data than ever before, and there is a danger that we do this indiscriminately. I think we just need to be very mindful and targeted about the data we collect and understand really what the use case is for collecting that data, and then build out the frameworks for sharing it. And so that's some of the work that's being done around the energy system. We're also seeing it in the built environment. The Centre for Digitally Built Britain is developing an information management framework to help share consistent data across the sector, so we can start to build a digital twins of physical assets too. And there is a good climate link here, because actually in future this can help us plan the urban environment a lot easier, encourage more collaboration, and understand what the impact of a changing climate is going to have too. So I think getting an understanding of what data you need and why is a fundamental foundation. Not the only one, mind you. You also need to think about things like cybersecurity. You need to think about governance frameworks. You need to think about consumer trust and the trust of all the actors having to interact within that system, and of course the digital plumbing as well. So the sensors, the how you're going to store data, where you're going to store data, and so forth. So it's by no means straightforward, particularly for such big ventures like trying to digitalize the energy sector. But it does offer a very powerful way to control increasingly complex, distributed and decarbonized energy system.
Yeah, that's a very good example. And we sit on the Energy Digitalisation Task Force, and it's actually something that I'm sort of thinking about, is actually what are the next steps of a lot of these task forces. And that's where I do think there is a role for standards bodies to bring and convene those stakeholders and reach that consensus, because that could sometimes be the trick, and then formalize some of that, whether that's a formal standard or an industry sort of standard that's for the industry alone, but it just seems that that sort of standardization piece there could really sort of drive some benefits. Did you have any thoughts on that at all, and sort of the core building blocks that could really help increase emerging technologies effectiveness? Go on.
I fully agree with you guys, but at the same time I also would like to add something. So when we design, for example, digital transformation clients we're working directly with, and they all have these lots of requirements, of course. Every time we design something new, and that comes with new business models, new ways of working, and the way we frame the problems, we don't go with technology. We don't say, for example, let's use AI for this. We actually say, for example, how can we democratize job shortlisting? You know, and so if we are building, for example, the HR system, you know, using AI. So it's more about, you know, focusing on that problem and then utilizing number one, technology, data. What's the new business model? What do we need to do for that change? Because there's also, like, you know, ethical and social responsibility around these technologies. You know, we don't want to take over people's job, and unfortunately, the kind of the group that is most in danger is the group that is mostly working in low-level tasks that easy to automate in factories and etc. So I think those are the areas where you know, we need to really work collaboratively, but then build that entire change, and the technology is part of it, and not driven by the technology, but it needs to be driven by the change we need.
I absolutely agree, Nur. I mean, that's certainly something we've been kind of really stressing to our partners, is that, you know, you shouldn't be defining what technology should be applied to what, but defining the problem, sharing the problem, and then kind of inviting views on how that problem could be solved. And it may be digital technology, it might not be, but it has to be challenge led.
Yeah, that's very good, because there's so many sort of things that we sort of, as you say, go technology-led. This is what we'll do, but actually, that is and again, you know, looking at energy, there's a big interplay between, if you do one thing, you know, almost the systems design of, you know, the energy system. If you do one thing, then it impacts the other. If you sort of go for hydrogen, then you need less electricity, etc., etc. And all of this is quite interconnected, and you need to sort of look at the sort of overarching problem. No, as you were talking this morning about systems design, the thought of diversity came to mind. More so, if we want to create sort of positive impact, it sort of became clear during the talk to me that we need to have a cross-section of society. And this doesn't just mean ethnicity or gender, but this also means the inclusion of marginalized people and those who come from non-traditional backgrounds, because, you know, there could be the sort of problem that, you know, you look at tech only from a tech sort of point of view, as, you know, which would lead into what we were discussing just about now. So yeah, we also know that a lot of sort of tech is you know, pretty male focused. How do you think we can encourage more sort of diversity in this area and that sort of broader perspective? And again, you know, I think about it with sort of standards making. You know, we need to sort of we've just recently launched a standard, or are creating a standard for inclusive design for EV charge points. So it is that sort of broader view of diversity. Have you guys got any sort of thoughts on how we sort of get these voices from different parts of society into not only the standards making process, but in emerging tech as well?
So we started building kind of like project principles, and then we started talking to ethicists and kind of social kind of expert from the society to help us to figure out one of the challenge we face often. So far our experience was to help people to use how to use the technology, right? Use a laptop, use a tablet, whatever. And now we are teaching technology how to operate with human. And here we need to teach technology actually to, hey, you know, don't discriminate. Hey, don't check their background. You know, don't check their ethnicity. And so this is where, you know, the early example of how can we democratize the, you know, job shortlisting. And there's already so much problems with the manual processes. You know, even if someone just apply for a job, we know that, you know, male, for example, apply for it straight away if they know 60% they can do the job, versus it's like 85-90% in female candidates. So how can we actually, you know, put this in a way that you know, now the technology can look into this, but at scale at the same time, processing like thousands of CVs all at the same time. It needs to be, I think standards play a good role, and policies play a good role. I wonder, like, if, data is dangerous, data is too transparent. We do need to tell data, we do need to tell system, don't see this, don't look at that, don't record that. Don't tell me, this area is criminal and the criminal's background is X, when I look into like a safe neighborhood or like a good school neighborhood in my property research search. I think it's beyond technologies, this conversation. And I think this conversation, especially around gender, diversity, equality, I think the policies, guidance, standards play a key role. That's what I mean by it's kind of difficult with emergent technologies, because the use of application could be different, and every single of them could be like a new innovation in its own, and we need one of you guys in our projects.
Yeah, again, AI can exacerbate some of this, because actually, as you say, as that data becomes more transparent, I think Amazon as a hiring and firing sort of, where AI sort of looks at that performance, etc., which obviously brings a lot of views where this could, some of the sort of views could be exacerbated by AI. So there's definitely sort of area there. Did you have any thoughts on that at all, Suzanne?
It's not really an area of expertise of mine. There are other people at Tech UK who are dedicated solely to try and encourage greater diversity in the tech sector, looking at everything from mid-career skills, learning and courses and training, to mentorships, to schemes that particularly target women when they come off back from maternity leave. We've even banned manuals as well, so we're not allowed all male panels at all for any of the events that we run. So it really is deep in our DNA to try and encourage a greater diversity within our sector. But of course, we face a massive skill crisis actually in the UK. No doubt other countries are feeling just the same. We have skills issues around engineering, all the way through to digital skills. So we're all kind of fighting to try and get more people to take part and look at our sector as a potential career change.
There's also one observation I would like to add, especially our world is digital and, either designer or technologist. And I work with a number of universities, and now I see more female students, like getting into the space. And then a couple of projects that I observed, the males becoming kind of leads or managers in the projects, and the females are more juniors and, more of the group, like getting things done. That also like a really difficult to manage while we have the talent crisis. That's also another point I would like to add.
We've got 5 minutes left, so I thought I'll lead with a final sort of tough question. Failing to ask tough questions early can lead to big complications down the road, and anyone that's ever managed a project will sort of know this. So my question is, what do you think are some of the tough questions that we need to ask ourselves now? Because, in energy, we're talking about the energy transition, but it feels like we're generally transitioning to a net zero global society. And that transition is only going to get bigger. Are there some big questions that you think we should ask ourselves? Obviously, we're standards makers, so we're probably coming from a slightly standards angle. But are there any big questions that we need to ask ourselves to sort of end on?
Shall I start perhaps and then pass on to Nur? So I'm sure she's got some fascinating insights from her experience. But I go back to some of the points I raised in my presentation around kind of bias, equality, ability to explain the decisions that are being made on the back of some of these digital technologies, if that is indeed something that's deployed. We need to think about the equality and ensure that there are no bits of society that are left out as a result of the decisions that we're making. And yeah, so they're just a few that come to mind immediately. I'm sure there are a lot more. I see in the chat someone has also kind of highlighted the energy requirements associated with some of the potential solutions. And of course, you know, one of the things that we're working on is the net zero transition of the tech sector itself. And of course, every sector is thinking through this at the moment and making commitments, implementing plans. So we need to be mindful that, you know, one solution doesn't create a problem elsewhere within the system, and then bed in all these questions around fairness and transparency and ethics as well.
Yes, I don't know if you have any short thoughts on that at all. No.
Just to add on to what Suzanne said, what do we break with this solution? It's really the tough question we need to think about. You know, like what we are causing with this? Like, there is no solution that actually fixes everything. It doesn't exist. There's always a cost opportunity or some other problems that comes to it. But leveling, balancing, prioritizing, what is it? Manageable problems, you know, or is it problems that cost us planet? That's not affordable. So really making that decision based on unintended consequences and try to identify them. And I think Suzanne's your digital twins is such an amazing idea to forecast the future state of the systems. We can do that with today's technology, and we can run what if scenarios. So COVID hit, we run out of toilet papers, right? We didn't predict that, but we could predict that. Now we have, you know, built a bit of resiliency. Now it's easier to supply things, for example, but that costs other things. So there's more deliveries, and you know, there's more the papers, etc. So that we started wasting. So I think it's our responsibility is to understand the problem, and then we devise the solution. What is this solution going to cost us in the future, and is that bearable?
Yeah, it's quite a bit for us standards makers to think about. I think we probably have about 30 seconds left before everyone will go to the sort of next session. So I think we'll conclude it there. That was very insightful for me. I hope it was insightful for everyone else. I certainly learned quite a lot. I wish we could have gone on for longer, actually, because you uncover so much when you speak. I want to thank you, the speakers, for a great session today twice. That was really good. So thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated. I also want to thank the audience for a very good session and your participation. Do reach out to me if you want any sort of follow-up questions, if there's anything not clear, but thank you all for your time. Very much appreciated. Brilliant.